You remember.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I think we'll probably officially get started here in what, Katie, you like to give 4 minutes time? Is that right?
Or maybe like, by 12:03.
Oh, I lost your sound. Did anyone else lose Katie's sound? No?
You can still hear Katie.
Thank goodness. Can you hear me, Amy? Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I just reconnected my audio. Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay, were you saying that you like to start at 12:04?
Yeah, or, in just a minute. I think there's a good majority of the folks here that registered.
Okay. Great. Well, before we officially get started, I'll invite anyone who wants to introduce themselves. You can come off camera and say hi, or you can put it in the chat. Your name, if you're a farmer or rancher, what operation you work with, and maybe where you're located within the Idaho region or Intermountain West, if you're joining us from outside of the Idaho area.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. Hi, since I don't know most of you. I'm Marcia McDaniel, and I'm with the Idaho National Lab in Eastern Idaho, so Idaho Falls. And I just met with Katie online the other day. She presented to a group of us, and I subscribed to your newsletter. And really, I'm just here to learn more. I'm not really involved with the organization, but I would love to learn more. We've got a lot of different projects going on here in Eastern Idaho, so I'm always open to learning what other folks are doing and exploring if there's any way to collaborate.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, Marcia. Appreciate you being here. And all of our panelists will do intros for you, so don't feel like you have to introduce yourself now. But always like to give other folks a chance to say hello if they want to.
I'll jump on. Dan Kent with Salmon Safe, based in Portland, and we have a small role in this project, and excited to see some of you again and see some new faces as well.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
And I'll follow Dan. I'm with Kevin Scribner. I'm also with Salmon Safe and also the Wave Foundation. So, similar, the Wave and Salmon Safe will collaborate in similar ways.
Great. Wonderful. Hey, Daniel, thanks for joining us. And we're recording this, so folks who have to jump out early, you will be able to get a recording of the full presentation. All right, I see Bob and Thea Jordan joining us. So Katie, you want to kick it off with the FARE introduction?
Yeah, I think I know most of the people on this call, but just in case, it's always good to give a quick background around about FARE Idaho. It's a relatively new nonprofit. FARE is an acronym. It stands for Food, Agriculture, Restaurants, and Establishments. We're uniquely structured, might be the only trade association structured throughout the United States around the food system. So we represent farmers, ranchers, independent restaurants, food and beverage producers, independent beverage establishments, and retailers. So really your farmers markets and your independent grocers. What we do is really advocate on behalf of our members, really ranges the gamut. It could be protection of farmland all the way to legislation impacting restaurants and bars that are a part of FARE Idaho. And then we work to connect Idaho producers to Idaho buyers to build a more resilient food system. So that's been an area of focus after we got out of the pandemic and really the pandemic aftershock. So thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to be here with you all.
Thanks so much, Katie. I appreciate that. So I will introduce myself. I'm Amy Mattias. I'm the program director for the Sun Valley Institute for Resilience. And I'm also a board member of FARE Idaho, and I chair the Farm and Agriculture Committee for FARE. So it's really a pleasure to facilitate these conversations and to ensure that our network of FARE Idaho members and supporters are aware of all the great things going on in the region. So Katie and I earlier this year attended the Idaho Agricultural Summit and heard a presentation by two U of I, the leaders on this grant. And we said, oh, wow, we think this is a great opportunity to make sure that FARE Idaho members know what's going on and know how they can get involved if it's of interest to them. So I'll do a really quick background for you all on what the Climate Smart Commodities program is, and then we'll jump into our panel discussion with our great panelists who are co-PIs or partners. I'm not sure how they term it on the grant, but you can tell us more about that in a moment. So the USDA announced their first ever Climate Smart Commodities program, in which that they wanted people, universities, tribal partners, agriculturalists, and nonprofits to apply for programs that would increase the amount of climate smart land management practices in agricultural sectors throughout the United States. It would also help to develop markets for those products and put money directly into the hands of producers who are instituting these practices. So we'll learn a little bit more about what those practices are here shortly. I think it was the largest grant University of Idaho has ever received, and it goes across, I'm going to read from my notes because it's a long list. So barley, beef, chickpeas, hops, potatoes, sugar beets, and wheat are all the commodities included in it. So it covers a really big array of products produced here in Idaho, which I think is really exciting for us to see such a well-rounded list of different products that fall within this grant. And a lot of it is based on these practices that people are implementing, kind of termed regenerative agriculture, and they use climate smart as the language in the grant. With that, I will let the people who know much more about it share about it. So I think we're going to just start off with each of our panelists, Neil, Tori, and Darin, to introduce themselves and talk about their role in on the Climate Smart Commodities program with University of Idaho. So Neil, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks, Amy and Katie for organizing this and inviting us to be on the panel. So my name is Neil Cresenti. I'm the Agriculture Program Manager for the Idaho chapter of the Nature Conservancy. For those that might not be super familiar with TNC, we are the world's largest conservation organization. We work in 70 countries and all 50 states. And at the heart of our work is really collaboration. We work with partners from landowners, farmers, all the way through companies to try and find solutions to environmental issues that benefit both people and nature. So our Idaho agriculture program is centered really around that. We work with farmers on the ground to implement practices, pilot practices, find lessons learned, and be able to share those lessons, all the way through working with companies and partners like Salmon Safe to try and find economic and incentive programs that'll help reward farmers for these great practices. And so TNC is I guess what we're terming a funded partner to the Climate Smart Commodities grant. And our role in that is to work with farmers to try these practices, to provide technical advisement to them, as well as working with companies to try and, again, find these supply chain opportunities where we can create more momentum around practice implementation, and just make the agriculture sector as a whole a solution to some of these problems in a way that again benefits both the environment as well as Idaho agriculture, and making sure it's resilient into the future. So again, thanks for having me, and happy to be here.
Great, thanks so much, Neil. Tori, do you want to go next?
Definitely. Yeah, I just want to mirror Neil's thanks to Katie and Amy to reaching out. I am a member of Desert Mountain Grass-Fed Beef, and we are also a funded partner under the grant. And our role really is, of all of the funded partners, we're a little bit of an oddball because we are a cooperative of ranchers who have been trying to do these practices for quite a long time and we think succeeding. And when this grant opportunity came along, we thought it was the perfect opportunity to partner with the University of Idaho, because we've been working in earnest on our own to really use cattle as a tool, as beef is one of the commodities that's in this grant as well. And we've been able to really cultivate some amazing relationships with some early adopting farmers who have been out on the edge of adopting practices that would qualify as climate smart, and have really been working to incentivize with our own grazing dollars folks around to really start to adopt this. So that's really where our interest came in, on being a funded partner and helping managing, bringing ranchers and farmers onto this grant and giving them a little extra incentive to try this out, because it's something that we truly believe and have seen the impact of what conscientious stewardship over industrial agriculture can do. And we also are super excited to have the backing of data collected by the university to help us in the endeavor of marketing, because we do go all the way from birth to sale of those animals to our grocery store and restaurant partners. And I think that's going to be an amazing opportunity for all of the folks, and to really bring along farmers and ranchers to that. It's not just dollars up front from the grant right now, it's that sustained market that we can build by having this coalition of all these interested parties and the backing of the university and these USDA dollars.
Fantastic. Thank you for that introduction to both your work and to Desert Mountain and their role in this commodities program. So Darin, can you introduce yourself and your role?
Yeah, I'm Darin Saul. I'm with Arrowleaf Consulting. Previously, when this grant was written, I was at University of Idaho and helped write the market portion of the proposal. My workload in general, I've been focused on local food and regional food system development for, I don't know, going on a couple decades now. And we do all kinds of work, from helping fund other groups. We do a lot of grant writing, but we also do research and feasibility studies. Climate Smart is one piece of that, but we do quite a bit of work with livestock. We've worked with food hubs, supply chain development, quite a bit of work with tribal systems and food sovereignty issues. Just kind of across the board, trying to see who's working on local and regional food and how can we integrate and support them at moving forward. Our role is often that of being the sociologists on the team, and we do the market analysis in general, and we do a lot of survey and focus group primary data collection as part of these kind of larger projects. For this project, our role is really market development and looking at these supply chains, and the primary focus, there's another half dozen people on the marketing part of this grant, and our piece is really looking at wheat, and then in discussions with, and we're partnering. So basically our part is Arrowleaf working with Salmon Safe and the Wave Foundation on this marketing piece, and wheat, and then we've been talking about basically broadening that to kind of wheat and the cover crops associated with it and the other kinds of grains. Now our part is also, as part of that, we have the ability to include, you know, other types of data collection and discussion as we're doing this. So we can include talking about some of the other commodities and options while we're exploring these supply chains. And then ours differs from the other pieces, which look to me to be more just straight up research, like the deliverable is going to be a journal article, and that this is meant to be a little more action research where we're helping create the supply chains while we're studying them. A piece of it is that the look at larger buyers, and so not just what's happening in Idaho, but how can we connect Idaho to some of the larger companies and markets out there. And so our part really is kind of going from Alaska to San Diego, the whole West Coast, and looking what the opportunities are. Part of that is because wheat, as you know, one wheat farm could probably supply most of the local need for all of Idaho. And so it's like we need to look at what are the export opportunities for these climate smart if we're going to scale them up. Okay, so that's plenty.
Very cool. Yeah, no, that was a great introduction. Thank you for giving us that kind of snapshot into the market development piece of the work that's being done. And I'm glad Salmon Safe and Wave Foundation are also on the call, as they're key partners in the work that you all are doing. So thank you so much. So let's maybe ground truth this a little bit and hear from Neil about like, what does climate smart actually mean and what practices are included in that definition?
Yeah, maybe somewhat unfortunate. The term climate smart adds to our lexicon of practice types, but at the heart of it, the climate smart practices are really those that will help to reduce emissions through agricultural systems, as well as provide opportunities to increase our soil's capacity to store carbon. There's USDA and NRCS has sort of identified the list of practices that they're comfortable, or they've kind of created standards around for climate smart practices and activities. I think one of the interesting parts of this project is really a lot of the information we hear around, whether it's climate smart or soil health. A lot of the information, the research that we see, it comes out of the areas like the Midwest. And so for one of the barriers that I think we often run into in Idaho in terms of implementation of the practices is just having that more regionalized and grounded information and research around not only how to implement these practices, but really the benefit of them. So the research part of this project will be looking at some of these practice, a smaller set of these practices, and really looking at the carbon sequestration potential of those practices, so that we have a better sense for where do we make the biggest gains, where can we really benefit from them. And then also on that, again, on that information barrier, a lot of times when we work with farmers, we'll hear folks say, well, that works in regions that have higher rainfall, and you can't really do that here. And I think that's true to a degree, but I think our agricultural system and farmers are also very creative and have a lot of ingenuity. And so I think we can approach some of these practices or philosophies like cover cropping in ways that are going to work for our regions, both the state as a whole as well as our subregions. So I think I'm kind of getting off the topic of the question at hand, but I think overarching, again, it's around, how do we create more resilient systems, both from the reducing impacts of climate change, as well as being a solution towards, the carbon piece of it in a way that works for Idaho.
It was a really interesting explanation of it. And I'm asking for those of us on the call that might not be able to conceptualize of like what these practices might be. You mentioned cover cropping. What other things does the NRCS consider to be beneficial?
Sure. So I guess if you were to think of them around soil, like the health of the soils, so it would be things that are going to provide a living root as long as possible. Things that are going to armor your soil or cover your soils, reducing tillage in different forms or fashion. Nutrient management is another big one, and that can take a lot of different forms. And then integration of livestock. And so kind of trying to create more mimicked natural systems through that integration. And I can talk in more detail about that, but I also don't want us to go down some technical rabbit holes.
No, that's okay. I think that was helpful to give kind of the breadth of potential practices that could be covered in this. And I think I failed to say this in the beginning, but we will have a Q&A session for audience members at the end of kind of this curated Q&A, but feel free to ask any questions that you all may have in the chat, and we can address those here shortly. So Neil, I really appreciate that. And I'm thinking Tori might be able to kind of share with us, like, we just heard kind of the theoretical part from Neil. How does this actually like work on the ground? Like, what are the farmers and ranchers in Desert Mountain Network? What are they doing and how do they benefit from this program?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent lead in for us, because we definitely are on the executing front of things. I know we've got some farmers and ranchers on the phone, and probably folks who've worked with a lot of us, and we really like to get things done. So it's a perfect transition. We really find this an exciting opportunity because a lot of these practices, I think when I've talked to a lot of farmers and ranchers, they hear the term climate smart, or if they've heard regenerative or sustainable before, and that seems like a really high bar. But I think most people don't realize that it isn't. When you're prioritizing soil health, a lot of it's kind of common sense and holistic systems that feed back into each other. So like Neil mentioned, one of the biggest things we can do to help with that carbon capture is build our soil health. So part of that might be building organic matter through grazing cover crops and allowing cattle to build up, to knock down some of those cover crops and build up some of your natural phosphorus and nitrogen stores through cattle versus a synthetic source. Minimizing synthetic fertilizer sources and stabilizing nitrogen is also a piece that has been addressed by the grant. And so a practical application of that would be obviously using composted manure, actually putting cattle on the ground. And then one thing that really excites us in Desert Mountain grass-fed beef is we've got some amazing farmers who've done great work with all of these practices, and they're ready to take some new and novel steps. And so that may be something like using a soil amendment like biochar or liming, and really kind of looking beyond what we conventionally do, relying on our conventional chemical and fertilizer suppliers to make these systems work. And then I think the big thing for Desert Mountain grass-fed beef is we feel there's a really powerful message, like Neil said, to helping people find what works in their system. And so we're really excited that this grant helps expand us outside of the typical NRCS type EQIP funding, or that where your hands may be tied to more established practices. What we're really hoping, and this is still an ongoing and developing process with the grant, is to allow for some things that are a little more novel. So a typical NRCS incentive program might allow you to interseed legumes as a process to help with nitrogen. And that's all it's seeing, all it's allowing for in the interseeding process. We've had a farmer down in the Bruno area who's had great luck interseeding winter wheat after his last cutting out of alfalfa. It gives him ground cover going into the winter, and it also really helps extend the life cycle of that stand of alfalfa. So to circle back to really how it benefits us is I think it helps us spread the story that we've already been developing. And for us, raising cattle is not just about the cattle. We need these farmers and guys that are on the commodity side to really understand that they can be a great tool, because grass-fed is a really hard system to do all the way from beginning to end, for the reason it's a limited amount of land out there. And what we think is really cool is that we can offer this if farmers are willing to start cover cropping and take that leap of faith, thanks to the incentive from the grant. We can both serve them and they can serve us, and we can really start moving towards that holistic system that doesn't waste any of these agricultural inputs, and they can feed off of one another and really be a positive climate story rather than this negative one that just takes from the land. We're always making sure that we return what's in there.
That was a really great explanation. Definitely some things that I think might be new concepts, and allowing farmers and ranchers to maybe experiment a little bit more is a really great opportunity, I think, coming out of this. So thank you so much for sharing that experience with us. And, hopefully maybe some more farmers will come on board and say, hey, this sounds cool. We want to do this. Let's work together. All right, Darin, we're going to move to you. And I know you chatted a little bit about this in your intro, but can you tell us a little bit more about like, what does it mean to develop a market for climate smart commodities, especially when you're talking about this more export focused kind of larger companies? Can you walk us through that process and what it takes to actually create these types of markets?
Well, I mean, connecting buyer to the seller ultimately and getting some transactions. I mean, part of the goal here, I think, is to kind of move beyond research and actually get some things sold. And then that's kind of how these things start to spin up, right? So I think our part, first of all, I mean, the partners, Salmon Safe and the Wave Foundation and stuff, I mean, we're not starting from zero. People have decades of work into this. And not just our research part. And so I think that there's quite a few buyers that have expressed interest, including institutional ones like Compass and Levy and the big sports teams and sporting arenas and buyers in Alaska and so forth. And so in addition to that, in our research, we recently did a project where we interviewed a lot of distributors, regional distributors, generally considered conventional. And at the same time, what we got back was a lot of interest in local and regional foods, and including that they're reallocating staff to trying to buy it and sell it and still source identified. So you're not necessarily just getting swept into some major brand. And so like in that work, we found, again, like distributors that are going to grocery stores are talking about how hot local is and the margin they can get, but there's just not the supply. And so they don't know how to connect with the supply and things like that. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. So our part of the project, one, we'll talk with our partners and make more strategy on how we're going to approach this. But then we'll do a round of interviews. And as part of that, again, as we identify opportunities, we'll feed that back to the group. And so if we find things where here somebody is looking for these types of products, anyway, that's good information. That's part of the piece. Then we'll move into as we do interviews, we'll probably do interviews all through the whole project. But then we'll do a series of surveys that are more extensive, where we try to reach out and hit a lot more potential buyers and market segments in terms of looking what they're looking for. So part of this as well is how do we characterize these products? As Neil said, it's a little bit vague right now. And when you listen to the science teams, it's not really clear that, everything's problematic and you sequester something and it burns off, and so there's all these questions of what climate smart even is. But I think we can take a more common sense approach than like a really hardcore quantitative modeling of carbon and get down to like, what are kind of the collection of practices. And I think, again, Salmon Safe, one of the reasons that we're partnering with them is they've been doing this. And so one piece of this is really to kind of evaluate, do we need like a climate smart certification program, or really do we go with something more comprehensive like Salmon Safe, which has climate smart practices already involved? And then how does that sell to the buyers? Like one of the things that we heard in our interviews is that there's a million certification programs and some of the buyers just don't know how to sort it out. And so some of it is one part of our piece is to look at the certification programs and how to market those and how all that fits with Climate Smart in Idaho and stuff, offer some recommendations on that. From there, I'm not really sure. We've talked about doing events where we get buyers and sellers together. I mean, there's all kinds of different parts of this project, right? And so some of it is to see how the collaboration develops and who's willing to collaborate and put energy into it. And then we'll participate in those parts and hopefully help bring what we learn about supply chains and who wants to play and what are the resources and, how can you make it work, and bring that to the rest of the team and start connecting people. I mean, we've seen it, just in our other research where we talk to somebody and then we connect them with somebody we talked to a couple weeks ago, and all of a sudden they're selling, and then we're not even a part of it. Our whole role is just to make that connection. And then once the transactions start, then you have something to scale up and start building on, and then you're building sustainable system.
Thanks for that. I think that was really helpful to folks who might not be as familiar with kind of the intricacies of how to get a raw agricultural product to a buyer who's interested in it. So really appreciate that. And I work on that scale at a regional level, and it's so fascinating kind of all the ways that products move through the market from field to fork. And I know that's what FARE Idaho loves to do. So I appreciate you kind of telling us a little bit more about how you're working through that. And I'm excited to see like what the determination is on the certification. If you all decide, is there a climate smart certification, or do you utilize some of these existing ones? I think that's a really interesting question. And I'm excited to see what the team comes up with as the answer to that.
I should say we're also going to look at value added. So, and some of this is from all of you, like what we actually go out and shop around has to depend on what people in Idaho want to sell, right? To a certain extent. So if there is value added, so forth, we'll integrate that as we go.
Great. All right. Thank you. So Neil, we're going to take it back to you. And for our farmers and ranchers on the call or who are listening to this afterwards, if they're wanting to participate, how do they get involved, and what does it take to do so?
Yeah. So as with one would expect from a $1 billion program, it's taken a little bit longer to roll out than I think maybe originally anticipated. There's 72 funded projects in total. And so we're still in the phase of I guess, signing the agreements with USDA as everyone else is. And so I would anticipate we'll be ready to actually sign farmer contracts probably sometime in the fall. And Tori, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's kind of looking at the crystal ball. That's kind of probably where we're going to be at. But that said, I really encourage folks to reach out to us with questions. They want to know more about the program, what practices we're maybe considering. I think they can reach out to anyone on this panel, but also there's 5 total funded partners that'll be implementing the project. Folks that aren't here include the Coeur d'Alene tribe, the Nez Perce tribe, and probably the biggest, the Idaho Association of Conservation Districts. So hopefully by the time we're ready to start signing farmers up, their conservation districts will be well positioned to do that. So a lot of the information will be available for those conservation districts. And then I'll drop into the chat the contacts for the project leads at University of Idaho. And University of Idaho Extension will also be involved with some of the outreach to farmers as well. So I think your sort of points of contact for information like that are going to be able to answer a lot of questions for folks.
Okay, great. So you're not missing out if you haven't yet connected with anyone. We're still waiting to get through to that part of the process. So definitely, if it's something, if you're a farmer or rancher, or farmers and ranchers are in your network and you think that this is something they would benefit from, get them in touch with Neil or any of the various other potential contacts that Neil listed off, which I have as Idaho Association of Conservation Districts, the Coeur d'Alene and Nez Perce tribe, and also University of Idaho Extension offices, which there's one of Extension office and conservation districts pretty much in every county throughout Idaho. So it sounds like those are some really good contact places for people to reach out to and begin the conversations if this is something that they're interested in implementing on their property.
Yeah, and
so,
I guess I'll also just mention it's a 5-year project, so it'll be over that time frame. If people want to see maybe the first year what it looks like, certainly there'll be more opportunities, I think, in the future. The other part, I think people will start to hear So the U of I project is one of, as I said, 72. I think there's a total of 12 projects, of which Idaho is part of the scope. So folks might start to hear about some other projects through various channels, whether that's the supply chain or if they're closer to Oregon or Washington and are sort of tapped into those markets, they'll probably likely hear about other projects out there as well. So, and again, if they reach out to us, we can help kind of provide as much information or maybe point to contacts for some of those other projects too.
Awesome. That's a great thing to note. So lots of other climate smart commodity things happening. So just because you hear from one of them doesn't necessarily mean it's the University of Idaho. So make sure you know exactly which one you're signing on to. And you might have contacts with 12 people, perhaps, which might be fun to navigate that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, Neil. I think that's great information to share with folks on the call. So Tori, I'm wondering if you can kind of talk to us a little bit about what some of like the opportunities, but also challenges are when it comes to implementing these practices on a farm or ranch.
Definitely. And at the risk of sounding like the opening to a self-help book, I think our challenges and our opportunities are almost the same. I really think that educational piece and getting folks on board is a challenge. I, however, am very optimistic the way that this grant was structured and the way that the University of Idaho strategically selected its funded partners, that will have a great opportunity to actually reach out to folks and give them someone to work with who they're comfortable with. At this point, they could sign up through the tribes, they could sign up through the Nature Conservancy if that's someone they're familiar with or know has worked with them. They can sign up through us at Desert Mountain Grass-Fed Beef, if they're more comfortable with the cowboy hat and the boots. And then also the big powerhouse we have is having the Idaho Association of Soil Conservation Districts. And that's where I would really encourage anyone who's on the phone who, that's a great place to reach out. Once again, we're all kind of in the same place right now where we're moving at the speed of government and need to hear back before we can finalize a lot of details. So I hope no one's getting too frustrated. We're not being intentionally opaque. We ourselves are waiting for a little information. But I know that Kyle Rooks, the president of the IASCD, just completed all of the division meetings. So that's catching up all of that district staff and some board members with where we're at. So they're a great resource. But yeah, I think that really is both the challenge and the opportunity. Is it's hard for folks who are already in established supply chains, who are taking over ranches and doing basically what dad and granddad did. It's hard to take that leap. I know that from personal experience. It's amazing how much it can hold you back, the fear of the unknown. So actually being able to have all these partners together who among all of us have really these beacon farmers and ranchers who can say, I've done this and I've been there, and help us with that outreach, I think is the huge opportunity of this grant and really giving us a platform. And then I think the second part really that is going to be hard to overcome and necessary for future success is really building the market incentive. And Darin was speaking to this. I mean, we will have this funding to help people get over the hump when it comes to taking that risk and putting dollars into the ground to try and change over to these new practices. But after 5 years, the hope really is that the market will be demanding these products and really giving people a sustained incentive to keep producing. And I think that's where the opportunity comes in. There's always, for quite a few years now, there's been claims of regenerative and sustainable and all of these things outside of the agricultural world. In consumer packaged goods, where things are a little more free and loose with labeling, you see people make their own claims. And I think it's been a little bit confusing and hard for larger industry folks to jump on that bandwagon because it's so squishy. And I think actually having data backed by a diversity is going to be a huge step in being able to get more folks to come along. We already, as a more niche marketing group, see folks who are more than happy and willing to come on board. We have customers who their consumers come in and actively talk about the climate story. We can be doing in stores and they tell us about the benefits of using grass-fed beef as a tool to build soil health. And so there's been that front end start. And I think between Darin's group and having a large amount of farmers on board, we can start that outreach to the folks that can actually demand a larger volume and help say our potato and wheat guys, because like Darin said, one wheat farm in Idaho could probably supply Idaho. So we can't really expect for someone to get onto this bandwagon in the long term if they don't feel like the market's going to be there. And coming from a vague different part of my life where I worked in industrial food production and research and development, if you're a certain size company with a certain size product line, you need to know the supply chains there before you really start leaning into that marketing program and lean into it. But I think this circles back a little bit to what Neil mentioned. There are a lot of federal dollars coming out and a lot of interest in this climate space. So I think there's such a great opportunity that this grant has allowed us to be kind of at the bleeding edge of this and get out ahead of a lot of interest and some government push to our larger partners in the food industry to really start looking at this. So I think there's just limitless opportunities there, and I'm very excited for what the future holds.
Thank you. That was quite a great list. And I totally agree with you that challenges are always opportunities in my book. So I appreciate your framing of it in that way. So Darin, we're going to pass it back to you. And I had originally asked you to talk about barriers to entering new markets. I'm wondering if maybe you could shift the response to that and talk a little bit more about, like, from the buyer side of things, like, what do we need to do to get these buyers bought in and purchasing these climate smart commodities produced here in Idaho?
So I think that I'm going to go ahead and start with the barriers because that'll lead to
Okay.
what you're saying exactly. So one of the things that we have found, I mean, we have another project where we interviewed, I don't know how many, 50, 60 buyers at large scale. And like, one of the problems is that they have their systems, and their systems are down to like the way their food preparation, kitchens and stuff are structured, right? And so it's like, we're talking to them and they're like, you know, we need 5-ounce chicken breasts exactly this shape, like that fits into our exact process. And like, we would have to remodel our, you know, this whole station over here to like take something that was different, and we can't trim anything, you know, because, and so their whole system, staff, everything is built around a certain piece. And so, but you know, again, we're on wheat and stuff, but it's like when we started this project, someone called and said, you know, they need 100 metric tons of this wheat, and it needs this moisture level and this gluten and this. And I mean, they had like 17 attributes that they needed because they're making a type of roll, and it's got to exactly be what their spec is. And so it's not like, so it's like a chicken and egg thing. It's like we need to figure out how to do contracts because we need someone to grow that wheat. But it's like that wheat is for a specific large buyer, and it may not be like common to the market. Like, I mean, I don't know yet, but it's like, it seems like this stuff's really specced out in what people are using in terms of, and we saw the same thing in some of the beef stuff, you know, fat content, on and on. They had some very specific specs of what they wanted. They want a lot of it. They want it uniform. And so I think that's one of the barriers, you know. It's like, again, it's like this chicken and egg thing. Like I don't know if it's speculative, like if you just grow wheat with a certain type of attribute and then assume there's going to be a market, or whether it's you get a contract with a company to grow that particular product. I think another piece is that, again, a lot of these systems, I mean, one of the things we ran into a lot with the local and regional foods when we were doing interviews with buyers is that this is outside their system. And so they have an ordering system that's online, and they have all these like procedures in place. And so then it's like any change is like extra work, and then it becomes a burden. And then it's like, if there's very much of it, then they can't, because they're already working full steam. And so even if they totally believe in it, it's not necessarily like they have extra FTEs to help make a change in their software system or stuff like that. And so again, there's a lot of kind of planning taking place on how you integrate into these systems, and then also understanding the system so you can integrate in them, versus just knocking on the door and saying, you know, I got a truckload of carrots, and can you buy them? So I think that's a piece of it in terms of what the opportunities. And then I think another piece is really that the marketing, like Climate Smart, we got all these attributes and all this science and stuff, but it has to be a simple story. Like you can't sell something. Consumers, you know, like one of the jokes has always been that, you know, what's the best way to market local food? It's, you know, like a children with big eyes and a cartoon playing with a lamb or something. You know, it's like something that's emotionally evocative is probably more important than what's on your label in terms of grabbing people's attention. And so like, however this shakes out on Climate Smart, it needs to be like a simple story that the buyers and the consumers can latch onto like immediately. And then for those portion of consumers and buyers that want to read through all the details, and there is a portion of them that needs to be there. At the same time, it's like really these like simple stories that make all this work. And so I don't know how this shakes out. I mean, listening to the larger group, it's a pretty complex piece. That's going to be hard to sell. You know, we got this giant project and scientists are doing this and everybody's doing this. It's like, that's going to be hard to walk in and sell. And so how do we boil this down into kind of like a simple message of what's happening here, and that people can latch onto, and then that the buyers can then in turn explain to their consumers and their customers and so forth. So anyway, those are some of the pieces. Beyond that, I think that, I mean, my experience in doing lots of interviews and stuff is it's just amazing what you find out when you start asking people questions. And so I think taking this as an approach, rather than that this is something that it's like you're going to develop a product and then push it out, it's more like this. I mean, I'm looking forward to this, like going and asking everybody and finding what the opportunities are and seeing. And then out of all this, my experience is, I mean, just in rough numbers, right? There's going to be a third of these people that we talk to that's just impossible, like just right out of the gate, right? There's some barrier. There's going to be a third of them where it's just possible. Maybe it's a fourth, maybe it's a third, where they're ready to go. And then there's going to be a chunk in the middle where there has to be a bunch of adaptation. And it's doable, but it's going to take some effort and another phase of thinking through and planning and getting stuff in place. And so it seems to me, again, it's like, you know, grab the low-hanging fruit, make a plan on how you're getting to the rest of it, and don't worry about the stuff that you don't have a chance at. Just that's more like let time go by and let the system change. So I don't know. Hopefully that kind of addressed your question.
That was great. No, absolutely. I think that gave us a really interesting view from kind of the buyer side of things, and how I think the magic is in the middle, right? Of like, where do the producers growing the food, how can they meet the buyers where they're at in order for the consumer to be the beneficiary at the end of the day by having access to incredible, delicious tasting food that's grown in a way that maybe honors the environment more than depletes from it. I think if that was like the summary of hopefully what Climate Smart is doing, maybe that's it from my perspective. And now I kind of want to hear from your perspective. So our last question is pretty broad, and I just want to know from you, like, and each of you will get a chance to answer this, of like, how do you imagine this program changing the landscape of agriculture in Idaho? Or if you could wave a magic wand and we're 5 years later, what would this program have accomplished, and what does it look like now in Idaho? So we'll just stay in the order we've been going. So Neil, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think one of the things that excites me most about this program is the size of it. It's really a unique opportunity for us to really address a lot of the barriers when it comes to practices. You know, being able to work with farmers and, not just kind of come out and say, hey, here's some dollars to, to implement this practice, but, to understand the economics of it, to be able to, provide them the space to, say what works and what doesn't work. And for Idaho to really be a leader, in whether you call it climate smart, soil health, but for Idaho to really be a star that folks look to, particularly in the West, where, I think we've seen a lot of these hurdles, I think would be a fantastic outcome. And then, as Darin is kind of saying on the market side, to be able to not only provide, the research aspects and the incentives, funding incentives for farmers to implement practices, but also the market aspect, to be able to think about what those market barriers are, what are those market opportunities. So I think really that's what excites me the most, is just this comprehensive approach that this project is going to allow us to do.
Great, thanks. Tori, will you wave your magic wand and tell us what it looks like once this program has been extremely successful?
Definitely. And I was going to say, if you're not an optimist, you don't stay in ranching very long. So I'm happy to be the optimist here.
Great.
For me, it's a really exciting place to give us space in the next 5 years to really use our wonderful little microcosm of Idaho that has all of its vastly different geographies, all of its varied crops, and then all of these extreme exterior factors like lack of rain that we've seen, lack of water, all of that pressing on us, to really allow people the space to try out these climate smart practices and realize that having an actual holistic system that can integrate and optimize efficiency through soil health, through multi-crop systems and livestock integration, and all of these new ideas really is not only a way that we're going to get to a better climate smart place in 5 years, but also leave us in a much more stable food system. And I think that's really the hope I have, is that at the end of 5 years, after giving folks the breathing room and the financial space to try out these practices, and they start to see the return, it really leaves us in a place where people can start to look at how we currently do agriculture in almost a closed system, like we're some sort of factory, and realize that at a certain point, we're in a living environment. All things that you're doing through agriculture, you need to realize that you have to put those, what you take out back in, and that we can really use agriculture not as something that offsets climate change, but also a positive thing that can help us with that climate story and recapturing carbon. So for me, it's really just that opportunity to give ourselves the space, because what I continually hear is, well, that'd be great, but we can only do it at a small scale, or that's just not the way the food system is set up. And I 100% agree from experience with Darin. It's hard to break into big food systems. You should see the specifications that go along with any given ingredient. I bet you didn't know that sea salt can be extremely varied and picky, so let alone wheat and a natural product that grows. But I really think by taking this first step in 5 years, we're really going to show not only our state, but folks outside of our state, that it's something that you can do, and that we are developing markets and kind of grabbing the low-hanging fruit, like Darin said, and really starting to move from these smaller markets and start that traction forward. So that's kind of my optimistic wave of the wand.
I love it. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Darin, wave your wand and tell us what that looks like in 5 years from today.
Well, I have a lot of hope. I think that I've been, working in ag since I was a little kid, but really the last 30 years focused on working with commodity ag and small farms and all the different pieces of it. And, 20 years ago, I remember when you bringing up local food, and, some of you know Colette and stuff, and hearing her, I mean, we were openly ridiculed by economists and stuff as how meaningless this was, like that you need to build factories and do stuff like that if you want to do local development. And since that time, it's come from being like something you're ridiculed over to a significant part of the economy. And so it seems to me now we're piecing together all these local and regional nodes into larger systems and supply chains. And I think it's, great that when we go interview a large distributor, they're excited, like, how can we get local food? How can we get regional food and stuff? And so I see this project, same with the piece on climate, again, that was a lot of swimming upstream for a decade or two, and now it's breaking into something that everyone's interested in. I think this project can help it move into actual practical reality. Like, we know that ultimately there has to be a market. Like, we can't just rely on some big federal grant. It's like, this is a way to jumpstart it, so we create supply chains that are profitable so that they're sustainable. And we have a chance to do it with a lot of these like commodities that are kind of on the cusp of getting into it. And so I guess my hope really is that we're able to spin up some supply chains that then are going to keep growing after the grant and become more significant and be part of this cluster of regional and climate smart foods and all that. So I don't know, it seems to me that this is the moment, right? It's not just this grant. There's all kinds of money for this kind of stuff right now. There's all kinds of change. So we get a chance with a bunch of money to try to organize some pieces and move them forward.
Fantastic. Well, I thought we were going to have time for Q&A with the audience. Luckily, we didn't get any questions in from the audience. We just got a lot of praise for how much great information it is and in agreement with you all. So I really appreciate you each taking your time, and maybe in 5 years, we can do this call again and we can see how everything measured up to your magic wand waves and really see, because I too have a lot of optimism that we're going to see this program and all the other wonderful activities happening really shift the practices in Idaho, shifting consumer demand so we can feel really proud of the food that we eat and where it comes from, and give the agricultural sector in Idaho a chance to be regenerative for generations to come, which is something I'm extremely passionate about. So I really appreciate you all being here. Panelists, Neil, Tori, Darin, thank you so much for sharing with us. And doing the work that you're doing to make this program successful here in Idaho. And as a FARE representative and as an institute representative, we would love to continue to support you however we can. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Great discussion today.
Amy, can I make a quick point before everyone hops off? I know we're pressed for time, but just as something to add on.
Sure.
As maybe I'll lower my hand now, but Brian was Salmon Safe. I didn't make my intro earlier. I've been so inspired listening to folks. And as Darin mentioned yesterday, as we met up in person with Kevin, we are in a moment. And I think I'm really glad Darin brought that up, as this is a really great moment to take advantage of. But just one quick plug I wanted to say was May 18th. Salmon Safe is cultivating a event with Payette Brewing, in which they will be sourcing grains and hops from growers in our program, both Idaho based. And so it's going to be an official launch of our Trout Safe program to the public. And so May 18th is a Thursday from 5 to 7. Anyone that's Boise based or in the metro area or just wants to come to Boise for that weekend is more than welcome. But Neil will be there, myself will be there, Dan will be there, and there will be some lightning talk series regarding conservation. So that's all I wanted to mention, was that, if you were interested in drinking some beer and having some discussions about local food and supply chains in Idaho, feel free to join. We'd love to have everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And great to see you.
Of course.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Bye.